The night is quiet, but not with peace. On the bay of Naples, darkness breathes heavy pressing against the water like a suffocating cloak. The sea is restless, its waves whispering secrets to the shore as if anticipating what is about to happen. Out on the water, a pleasure boat drifts lazily, lanterns glowing faintly, laughter echoing over the waves. But listen closely. The laughter is brittle, rehearsed, and soon swallowed by the sea. Suddenly, the silence fractures. A violent crack of splintering wood explodes into the night. The boat groans, timbers shattering under an unseen weight, and chaos erupts. Screams rip through the darkness as men and women plunge into the black water. The crash of waves mingles with the shrieks of drowning voices. And at the center of this terror, one figure fights desperately against the sea. Her name is Agrippina, mother of the Emperor Nero. But this is no accident. The boat was never meant to sail safely. It was designed to betray its passengers, to fold into ruin and drag her down into the abyss. This floating coffin was conceived in the mind of her own son. Rome's golden boy, the emperor, beloved for his youth and beauty, had built a death machine for the woman who gave him life. Imagine it: water surging into your lungs, salt burning your throat, the weight of betrayal pressing down heavier than the waves themselves. Agrippina thrashes against the cold sea, her silk garments dragging her down like chains. Servants scream, clawing at wreckage. Some vanish beneath the tide. But Agrippina fights. A mother's instinct, honed by years of surviving Rome's poisonous politics, refuses to let her sink. She claws her way to a piece of debris, hauling herself above the black water. She will not die tonight, not yet. But what kind of world is this where a son becomes his mother's executioner? Rome calls Nero the bringer of games, the patron of arts, the emperor of spectacle. But beneath the theatre, something monstrous festers. Tonight, the emperor has declared war not on an enemy of the state, but on the woman who birthed him, guided him, protected him. So we must ask why. What compels a ruler draped in power and glory to orchestrate such a grotesque betrayal? Why design collapsible boats, poisoned meals, collapsing ceilings, all to rid himself of the one person who made him emperor? Was it fear? Was it paranoia? Or was it simply the intoxication of power, corrupting blood into venom? Tonight is only the beginning. Agrippina survives the sea, but survival is not salvation. This is the opening move in a game that can end only in blood. For when an emperor plots his own mother's death, the question is not if she will die, but how long she can resist the inevitable. To understand the horror of what we've just witnessed, we must step back, rewind the tale to a time when Rome's skies seemed to shine brighter, when the name of Nero was not yet cursed. Picture the city at its height, marble temples gleaming in the sun forums, alive with merchants, theatres resounding with applause. Rome in the 1st century was the beating heart of the known world, its power stretching from the deserts of Syria to the stormy isles of Britannia. And at the center of this empire stood a boy emperor draped in purple, crowned with laurel, adored as if he were a god made flesh. Nero, Claudius Caesar, barely 17, when he claimed the throne, embodied youth and promise. His cheeks were smooth, his voice warm, his gestures graceful, almost theatrical. Poets likened him to Apollo. The people cheered his performances in music and poetry, charmed by an emperor who seemed more artist than tyrant. To the plebeians, he was a symbol of renewal, a golden dawn after years of imperial intrigue. To the Senate, he was a malleable youth they could guide. To Rome itself, he was destiny incarnate. And beside him, always beside him, stood Agrippina the younger. Regal, commanding eyes, burning with the cold fire of ambition. She had clawed her way up through the mire of palace politics, outwitted rivals, seduced power, and secured her son's path to the throne. The blood of emperors ran through her veins. She was sister to Caligula, niece to Tiberius, daughter of Germanicus. Her lineage alone was imperial steel. To many, she appeared as Rome's true ruler, the empress in all but name, guiding her son's hand with the wisdom of experience and the ferocity of survival. At first, it was a flawless picture. Mother and son seated together on gilded thrones, sharing triumphal processions through cheering crowds. Coins struck with Agrippina's image alongside her son's, a shocking act in Roman tradition, but one that only enhanced the aura of unity. Banquets glowed with gold and silk laughter rising into perfumed air. Senators bowed low, generals pledged allegiance, and poets sang hymns of divine harmony between emperor and mother. Yet perfection in Rome was always an illusion. Behind the polished marble cracks formed unseen. The empire had known too many rulers, too many betrayals, too much blood. And no empire, least of all Rome, could tolerate two sovereigns sharing one throne. But for now, in these early years, it seemed almost believable that Agrippina and Nero were unshakable, fused together by ambition, united in triumph. Rome marveled at the spectacle, and for a fleeting moment, it seemed that mother and son would rule together side by side, as if nothing could divide them. But history is merciless to illusions. The brighter the mask, the darker the truth it conceals. And beneath the gold and marble of Nero's reign, something malignant stirred. The perfect picture would not last. The very bond that had raised him to power would become the poison that destroyed them both. It is in silence that poison first spreads, not in sudden shouts or violent gestures, but in whispers. Within the marble halls of Nero's palace, the earliest symptoms of fracture emerge quietly. Advisors lean close to the emperor's ear, murmuring what a son should never hear. Your mother controls you. Your mother overshadows you. Your mother may even replace you. Agrippina had fought like a lioness to secure Nero's throne, but Rome was never kind to powerful women. Senators sneered behind closed doors. Generals grumbled at her audacity, and Nero, still young, still uncertain, absorbed their venom. Each word planted doubt. Each glance toward his mother became a reminder that he was emperor, yet not entirely free. At first, the changes were subtle. Nero began making decisions without consulting her. He dismissed her from councils she once dominated. Where once he gazed at her with filial pride, now his eyes darted with suspicion. Agrippina, sensing the shift, did what she always did. She tightened her grip. She reminded him coldly that she had placed the crown upon his head. She let him know that if she had the power to make him, she had the power to unmake him. That was her mistake. For Nero, these words cut deeper than any blade. To the world, he was Apollo, reborn emperor of the greatest empire on earth. But to himself, he was still a boy, tethered to a mother, who treated him as her creation. The resentment festered, mixing with fear. And then came love, dangerous love. Nero became infatuated with a former slave girl, Acte. She was gentle, submissive, everything Agrippina was not. When Agrippina discovered this, she erupted. How dare her son love a woman beneath his station? How dare he threaten the alliances she had carefully crafted through marriage and politics? She berated him, insulted him, and warned him of disgrace. But Nero was no longer a child. Every insult fed his growing fury. Every command from his mother reminded him that he was an emperor in name, but a prisoner in truth. The court began to whisper who ruled Rome, Nero or Agrippina. Soon the whispers became accusations. Agrippina was said to be plotting with Britannicus, the rightful son of Claudius, whom Nero had supplanted. If Britannicus lived, Nero's throne was not secure. And who better to restore him than Agrippina? Nero believed it. Or perhaps he wanted to believe it, so that suspicion could harden into justification. And so Britannicus died poisoned at a banquet, his face turning purple before horrified guests. Officially, the cause was epilepsy. Unofficially, everyone knew the truth: Nero had struck first. But even in death, Britannicus left a shadow. Nero had proven he could kill. He had proven he could silence rivals, and Agrippina understood her son had outgrown her leash. From this moment forward, there was no longer unity, no longer harmony. There was only a cold, widening gulf between mother and son, each calculating the other's destruction. The first symptoms had appeared. The disease of paranoia was spreading, and it would not stop until blood was spilled. Once paranoia takes root, it blossoms quickly into obsession. Nero could no longer look upon his mother without seeing a threat, a rival, a shadow looming larger than his crown. And so he resolved to do what no son should ever dare. He plotted her death. But Nero was no ordinary killer. He was an emperor, a performer, a man who craved not only the deed but the spectacle. Each attempt to rid himself of Agrippina would be a grotesque drama staged with all the pageantry of imperial Rome. The first design was poison. Rome had long perfected the art of discreet killing, and no woman was more familiar with its taste than Agrippina herself. She had after all been suspected of using it to clear Nero's path to the throne. Servants slipped drafts into her wine, but Agrippina, ever the survivor, suspected treachery. She took antidotes, purged herself, and survived. The venom failed. Nero, frustrated, turned to mechanical ingenuity. If poison could not fell her, perhaps architecture could. A ceiling was rigged in her bedchamber, weighted with deadly timbers and machinery. The plan, when Agrippina retired for the night, the roof would collapse, crushing her body beneath a rain of iron and wood. But the scheme, like so many others, unraveled in whispers. Someone betrayed the plot. Agrippina escaped the chamber before it could be sprung. The ceiling caved in upon emptiness, and Nero's rage swelled to fever pitch. It was then that he conceived his most infamous contraption, the death boat. A vessel designed not to carry its passenger safely across the Bay of Naples, but to collapse beneath her feet, plunging her into the dark waters. Engineers disguised their work beneath polished decks, building hinges and lead weights to ensure failure. Agrippina was invited to a festival, coaxed onto the vessel with the flattery of reconciliation. Lanterns flickered across the water, music rose into the night air, and Agrippina set sail, never guessing that her son had signed her death warrant with carpentry. When the trap was sprung, the boat cracked open like an eggshell. Wood splintered, beams shattered, passengers screamed. Some were crushed instantly, others hurled into the sea. Amid the chaos, Agrippina plunged into the water. Weighted by silks, battered by wreckage, she fought against the black tide. But survival was in her nature. Struggling to the surface, clinging to a fragment of timber, she reached the shore alive. News of her survival spread like wildfire. Nero's careful theatre of murder had collapsed into farce. The emperor, who longed to appear divine, now looked ridiculous, his crime unfinished. His mother, dripping with seawater and fury, sent word to him that she had survived his accident. The message was clear, she knew, and Rome would know. But Agrippina's triumph was short-lived, for Nero was not finished. If plots and poisoned ceilings and ships could not destroy her, then only one path remained. The bluntest, the cruelest, the most undeniable. Steel and blood. Imagine her now, Agrippina, survivor of poison, survivor of collapsing roofs, survivor of the sea itself. She returns to her villa near Baiae, clothes torn body, bruised mind, heavy with the certainty of betrayal. She is alive, yes, but in that survival there is no triumph, only terror. For she knows with a clarity sharper than any blade, if her son has tried this hard to kill her and failed, he will not stop until he succeeds. The villa that once felt like a sanctuary now becomes a gilded prison. Every servant's glance lingers too long. Every whisper of footsteps in the corridor makes her blood quicken. She sits alone at night, the air heavy with the scent of salt and pine, listening to the creak of doors, the shuffle of sandals, waiting for the moment steel would flash from the shadows. What thoughts must have haunted her? This was Agrippina, the younger daughter of Germanicus, sister of Caligula, wife of Claudius, mother of an emperor. She had risen through the swamp of Roman politics, not by luck, but by sheer ferocity. She had used charm, cunning, and cruelty when needed. She had outmaneuvered rivals, silenced enemies, and pulled her teenage son onto the throne of the greatest empire the world had ever known. All her life had been a climb upward, a ruthless march to survival and power. And yet now she faced an enemy she could not defeat. Because he was not a rival senator, nor a scheming general, nor even an emperor to be toppled, he was her son. The child she had cradled, protected and moulded into power. How could she strike against him? How could she rally support against the emperor without condemning herself? Every option meant doom. To fight him was treason. To surrender was death. So she lingered in a state of dreadful limbo, trapped between the mother's instinct to shield her son and the woman's instinct to save herself. Alone in her chambers, she may have replayed her mistakes, the years of domination, the sharp words of control, the arrogance of reminding Nero that she had made him emperor. Perhaps she even wondered, had she planted the very seed of hatred that now bloomed in his heart, Rome itself had turned away from her. Once senators had bowed before her, coins had borne her image, her presence had commanded awe. Now her power was a memory, her influence eroded, her name whispered with mockery. She was no longer the architect of dynasties. She was prey, and still she hoped. Somewhere perhaps a mother's faith clung to the belief that her son might hesitate, that blood might weigh heavier than ambition. But every hour, every rumor, every silence that stretched too long told her otherwise. Agrippina stood alone, stripped of allies, stripped of trust, waiting in dreadful solitude for the inevitable blow. Because in Rome, survival was never a right. It was always borrowed time. And Agrippina's time was nearly spent. For every sickness, there are cures. But what cure is there for a son who believes his mother is his mortal enemy? Nero's reign became a theatre of remedies, not for Rome's ills, but for his own paranoia. His court, a congregation of flatterers and cowards, offered him solutions, each one darker, more absurd, more desperate than the last. They were not cures at all, but poisons of another kind, feeding his obsession until it consumed him entirely. Poison, they reminded him, was Rome's ancient medicine for inconvenient lives. But Agrippina, schooled in intrigue, had long mastered the art of antidotes. She carried protective charms, drank carefully measured tonics, and knew every trick to detect a tainted cup. To poison her was to duel with her on familiar ground. Nero's cupbearers tried and failed, each attempt foiled by her vigilance. His cure for the mother, who would not die, only deepened his sickness. If venom could not pierce her, then perhaps steel might. Advisors whispered of assassin's blades slipping silently through curtains in the night. But such a cure was too obvious, too crude, too unworthy of an emperor who saw himself as a divine performer. Nero craved spectacle, not simplicity. He wanted her death to appear as fate, as accident, as the hand of destiny itself. And so he turned again to invention. The collapsing ceiling, rigged with heavy timbers, had failed. The collapsible ship, designed to drown her in the Bay of Naples, had failed. Each failure made him appear ridiculous, a clown of murder in Rome's whispers. Agrippina's survival mocked him. Every breath she drew was a reminder that the emperor with all his armies and engineers could not destroy one woman, his own mother. The more he failed, the more desperate he became. His advisers, terrified of displeasing him, encouraged his madness. Build another device, try another trick, they urged. They treated his paranoia like a fever, and instead of cooling it, they fed the fire. Their cures were as grotesque as the disease itself. Rome's ingenuity, once devoted to aqueducts and roads, was now squandered on death machines aimed at one woman's body, and Agrippina endured. Each attempt, each failure, left her bruised but breathing. She lived in the eye of a storm, knowing it could not pass, only tightening. The cures were not working because the disease was not Agrippina, it was Nero. His mind, corroded by fear and pride, was sick, and no remedy could restore what had already rotted. When all devices failed, when all tricks collapsed into humiliation, there remained only one cure left to try the raw, naked brutality of murder. A blade, an order, a squad of men who would not return until the Empress's blood stained their swords. The futile cures were over. The Emperor's madness had found its final prescription. The sea had not claimed her. The collapsing ceiling had missed its mark. The poisons had lost their sting, and yet Agrippina knew these were not victories, only delays. Each survival was not a reprieve, but a countdown. Her son's hand had already signed her death. The ink was only waiting to dry. In her villa at Baiae, Agrippina lingered in uneasy stillness. The air smelled of salt and laurel, the sea lapping against the shore like a mocking reminder of her narrow escape. Servants tended to her wounds from the shipwreck, but their faces betrayed something darker than concerned fear. They knew what she knew. Rome knew what she knew. When an emperor wishes you dead, life itself is only borrowed time. She received a letter carried on imperial parchment, its words crafted with chilling diplomacy. Nero expressed relief at her survival gratitude to the gods for sparing her and reassurances of his eternal love as a son. But Agrippina was no fool. Every phrase, every stroke of ink reeked of deceit. It was not a message of reconciliation. It was the silence before the blade. Perhaps she ate her last meal that night with deliberate slowness, savouring what little remained of mortal comforts. Bread olives, a draught of watered wine, simple fare, yet heavy with finality. Perhaps she gazed at the flickering lamp in her chamber, knowing it might be the last light her eyes would ever meet. And then came the sound footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, not the soft tread of servants, but the march of executioners. Agrippina's pulse must have slowed, not quickened. She had expected them. She had prepared. When the assassins entered, blades hidden beneath their cloaks, she did not scream, nor beg, nor flee. She looked upon them with the same cold fire that had carried her through decades of blood and betrayal. And in that moment she spoke words that would echo through history. When the first blade flashed, she bared her body and commanded, "Strike me in the womb that bore him." It was not merely defiance, it was accusation, prophecy, condemnation. She demanded that her killers wound the very flesh that had given life to Nero, as if to say, this crime is not merely murder, it is an abomination against nature itself. One can imagine the silence that followed the hesitation of hardened assassins before the gaze of a mother confronting the ultimate betrayal. But orders are orders. Rome's emperor had commanded, and Rome's soldiers obeyed. The end did not come swiftly. Agrippina's body was pierced again and again, her blood soaking into the marble floors of her villa. Her death was not a quiet slipping into darkness, but a brutal, deliberate erasure. And yet, in her final words, she had claimed the last victory, the eternal truth that Nero, in killing her, had condemned himself. The curtain was falling. Agrippina was gone. But the play was not over, for the true horror of her death lay not in her wounds, but in what came after. The villa was quiet when they came, but it did not remain so. Torches flared against plastered walls. their smoke curling into the night. The assassins moved quickly, shadows cast long across the marble floors. And there at the centre of her chamber stood Agrippina, imperial robe, dishevelled her body, bruised from the wreckage of the sea, but her gaze unbroken. For a moment time seemed to hold its breath. Then steel was drawn, and the room erupted in violence. The first strike pierced her flesh, hot iron tearing through silk and skin alike. She staggered, gasping, but did not cry out. Instead, she turned her eyes upward as though appealing not to the gods who had long abandoned her, but to history itself. Another blow followed and another, until the floor was slick with blood, her body collapsing under the weight of betrayal. Yet even in agony, she remained defiant. When the blade hovered near her chest, she pushed it downward toward her belly. "Strike me in the womb that bore him," she commanded again, her voice ragged but unyielding. And so they did. Swords carved through the flesh that had once carried the future emperor, severing the sacred bond between mother and child in the most grotesque of ways. Blood pooled beneath her, warm and thick, the chamber filling with the stench of iron smoke and fear. Her screams, or perhaps they were not screams, but low guttural cries, echoed against the high ceilings, blending with the hiss of torches and the hurried breathing of her killers. She was no longer the Empress of Rome, no longer the architect of dynasties. She was reduced to raw humanity. Skin, sinew, blood, and pain. And yet there was something more. In death, Agrippina became a symbol. The womb ripped open was not merely flesh, but the empire itself torn apart by the unnatural hand of matricide. Rome, which prided itself on honor, piety, and family, now bore witness to its emperor committing the most unnatural act imaginable. An emperor who killed his mother had severed not just bloodlines, but the moral spine of his reign. When the final blow fell and her body went still, silence returned. The assassins stood over her corpse, their hands slick, their faces pale. They had completed their orders, but the room did not feel like victory. It felt like desecration. Agrippina lay sprawled, her lifeblood seeping into the stone, her eyes glazed, yet accusing, as though even in death she condemned them all. Her body was burned quickly, unceremoniously on a makeshift pyre. No grand funeral, no solemn rites, no imperial honors. The smoke drifted into the night sky, carrying with it the last trace of a woman who had once commanded Rome itself. The ashes of Agrippina vanished into the air, but the crime could not be erased. For in that villa, with torchlight flickering over her ruined body, something darker than death, had been born the legend of Nero the matricide. And from that moment onward, his reign would never escape the stench of blood that had soaked into the stones of his mother's chamber. When the last torch was extinguished and the embers of Agrippina's body drifted into the night sky, the empire did not fall silent. Rome was never silent. Whispers carried faster than soldiers could march, faster than imperial edicts could be proclaimed. Within days, the truth of what had happened in Baiae spread from the coast to the capital. Nero had murdered his own mother. At first, the emperor tried to mask the crime with theatre. Publicly, he insisted that Agrippina had conspired against him, plotting his downfall. He spoke of daggers found in her villa, of treasonous letters of evidence so conveniently damning that even the most loyal subjects struggled to believe it. But lies rot quickly, and in Rome the stench of deceit was strong. The Senate, though cowed into obedience, shuddered at the thought of an emperor so unnatural. Senators bowed, as they always had, but their eyes carried judgment. Ordinary Romans whispered in taverns and markets, "What kind of man kills the mother who gave him life?" Even among the empire's hardened legions, matricide was an abomination beyond comprehension. And yet, it was more than just a rumour. Ancient historians preserved the tale with grim fascination. Tacitus wrote of Nero's plots with cold detail, describing the failed shipwreck, the assassins. The final command, "Strike me in the womb that bore him." Suetonius, ever hungry for scandal, painted Nero as the embodiment of monstrous excess, a son twisted by paranoia and cruelty. Cassius Dio added his voice, describing not merely the act, but its consequences, a reign forever poisoned by the blood of a mother. Later generations would wonder whether some parts of the story had been exaggerated, embroidered by enemies to blacken Nero's name. Was the ship truly engineered to collapse? Did Agrippina truly cry out those immortal words? Or were they placed in her mouth by historians hungry for poetic irony? These questions remain suspended between history and legend. But whether literal truth or symbolic embellishment, one fact is unshakable. Nero ordered her death, and Rome never forgave him. For the Romans believed deeply in the sanctity of family. Fathers ruled households with iron, but mothers were sacred. To kill a parent was to curse yourself, to draw the wrath of the gods to stain your soul beyond redemption. Nero's act was not merely political murder, it was sacrilege, and so his reign became haunted. Every triumph, every performance, every golden statue was overshadowed by the invisible ghost of Agrippina. She had been burned quickly, her ashes scattered her name, condemned to silence. Yet in death she became louder than ever. She lingered in the whispers of courtiers, in the judgment of senators, in the fearful glances of soldiers. The emperor had won his battle, but lost his soul. The unveiled truth was simple, and it spread like wildfire. Rome was ruled by a monster who had killed his own mother. And from that moment on, Nero's throne, though gilded, was forever dripping with blood. Long after the villa at Baiae fell silent after the smoke of Agrippina's hurried pyre had vanished into the night sky. Her presence lingered like a ghost no fire could banish. Nero had erased her body, but not her shadow. In every whispered rumour, in every historian's page, in every moral judgment handed down through the centuries, Agrippina still lived, haunting her son, haunting Rome. For the act of matricide was not a single crime. It was a curse that spread outward, poisoning all it touched. Nero, once adored as a golden youth, never escaped the stench of that night. No matter what he built, no matter what spectacles he staged, the image of his mother's blood clung to him like a second skin. The people might cheer his songs, his races, his games, but always beneath the applause lay the question, how could this man, who strummed the lyre with delicate hands, also plunge a dagger into the womb that bore him? Even his victories turned hollow. When Rome burned years later, tongues wagged that the same emperor who killed his mother had also torched his city. When senators and nobles vanished under waves of executions, Rome muttered that a man capable of one unthinkable act was capable of all. His reputation as artist, builder, performer, these withered in the shadow of one deed. History did not call him Nero the musician, Nero the builder, Nero the patron of the arts. History called him Nero the matricide. And Agrippina, though denied a proper funeral, denied honour, denied the reverence owed to an empress, achieved a different kind of immortality. She became the eternal mirror of Nero's crime. Her final words, "Strike me in the womb that bore him," whether fact or legend, echoed louder than all of Nero's songs. Her death was not only her end, it was the beginning of his downfall. For in Rome, power was fragile. Thrones cracked not only from external enemies, but from the weight of their own sins. Agrippina had given Nero life, had given him empire, had given him legitimacy. By destroying her, he had severed his own foundation. He stood atop the empire, yes, but his footing was forever unstable, his legacy already crumbling beneath him. Centuries later, When scholars read Tacitus and Suetonius, when dramatists reimagined Nero's court, when artists painted the death of Agrippina, the lesson remained clear. Unchecked ambition consumes itself. Power devours the very blood that feeds it. And the theatre of Rome, for all its grandeur, was built upon stages where love, loyalty, and family could be sacrificed to the appetite of empire. So we are left with a question that refuses to fade. When power demands blood, does it ever stop with enemies, or does it always inevitably turn inward, striking even at the wombs and hands that once nurtured it? History offers no comfort here, only a warning whispered through time that in the shadows of power, even the bonds of blood are never safe.